training camp. Raven Johnson snubbing Caitlin Clark on a high five. Dare I say,
the gym fell into complete silence when the ultimate act of disrespect unfolded in real time, proving that some rivalries don't just survive the leap to the pros, they evolve into something far darker and infinitely more permanent. Everyone assumed the bad blood had been buried on the college hardwood, believing that the move to the professional level would somehow miraculously erase the bitter, deeply personal history between these elite competitors. But a massive rumor has just ignited the entire sports world, claiming that day one of an elite training camp crossover, music, was completely derailed by a brutal, unflinching refusal to shake hands. It wasn't a simple miscommunication or an accidental oversight born from exhaustion, but a calculated, ice-cold rejection involving Caitlin Clark, a fiercely devoted veteran ally named Sophie, and the one player who has haunted Caitlin's legacy for the past 2 years, Raven Johnson. When whispers of this jaw-dropping camp drama leaked across social media through insider text threads and anonymous burner accounts, it absolutely shattered the internet. Music, leaving fans, analysts, and former players desperately scrambling to piece together what truly happened behind those locked, windowless doors. To understand why a routine, customary handshake transformed into a full-blown psychological war zone, you have to recognize that this wasn't a sudden eruption of ego, but the violent boiling over of a toxic rivalry that has been simmering under intense, suffocating media pressure for well over a year. The roots of this vicious camp standoff run far deeper than a single day of practice, stretching all the way back to a time when both players were locked in a fierce battle for absolute supremacy in the collegiate ranks. The underlying tension actually traces back to a singular moment that has been permanently seared into the memory of basketball fans everywhere. A moment of such raw, unfiltered disrespect that it literally altered the trajectory of 2 careers and fundamentally changed the way women's college basketball is consumed by the masses. Music. Picture the 2023 Final Four in Dallas. The arena lights blinding, the stakes astronomically high. Music, and Caitlin Clark executing a defensive maneuver so utterly humiliating, it felt like an open-handed slap across the face of the entire South Carolina roster. A team that had constructed an absolute dynasty built entirely on intimidation and suffocating dominance. Music. She locked eyes directly on Raven Johnson, who stood positioned behind the three-point line in a perfectly open shooting stance. Music. And rather than closing out or establishing any kind of defensive presence, Caitlin simply waved her off, openly refusing to guard her and broadcasting to the entire watching world that she considered her opponent a complete and undeniable non-threat. That single dismissive wave exploded virally within seconds, dominating major sports networks, flooding social media timelines across every major platform, and transforming what could have been a sharp strategic defensive decision into a massive cultural flashpoint that bitterly divided basketball fans around the entire globe. For the casual viewer watching from their couch, it was just a spicy, wildly entertaining highlight that, music, fits seamlessly into the modern era of viral sports content. But for the young woman standing on the receiving end, it was a deeply personal, very public humiliation that tore through her mental foundation and nearly drove her completely out of the sport. But what unfolded next behind closed doors, away from the flashing cameras and the thunderous crowds, would stun everyone who assumed the story ended with a viral internet meme. Rather than simply shaking it off and pressing forward, the crushing psychological weight of that viral embarrassment pulled the young South Carolina guard into an extremely dark mental space. Music, where the relentless noise of the internet became entirely deafening, replaying in her mind every single time she stepped foot on a basketball court. Intense rumors, and later confirmed reports, surfaced revealing that the emotional toll was so devastatingly severe that she genuinely contemplated walking away from basketball altogether, buckling under the suffocating weight of millions of people endlessly mocking a single vulnerable moment on the sport's absolute grandest stage. It required a massive, emotionally exhausting intervention from legendary head coach Dawn Staley, paired with a grueling, silent off-season spent grinding completely in the shadows, to slowly begin rebuilding a shattered psyche, channeling overwhelming public humiliation into music, laser-focused, lethal vengeance. She invested thousands of hours in empty gyms, launching hundreds of thousands of shots, transforming the exact weakness that had been ridiculed on national television into a devastating weapon she would eventually unleash directly on her greatest rival. When the 2024 national championship game finally arrived, shattering every single television viewership record in the entire history of the sport, music, the narrative had completely reversed, and South Carolina didn't just defeat Iowa, they systematically and mercilessly dismantled them on both ends of the court. And that same dismissed guard played a pivotal, suffocating defensive role against the very player who had humiliated her a year earlier, famously ripping the ball clean from her grasp in a viral moment of her very own that felt like pure, undeniable poetic justice. The post-game atmosphere was unbearably thick with unspoken tension, marked by a brutal, lingering stare-down of total vindication that supposedly sealed the chapter on their beef permanently. But in the hyper-competitive, ego-fueled world of elite basketball, vengeance almost never delivers genuine peace. And that still wasn't the complete story of this bitter rivalry, because the basketball gods had already arranged for their paths to violently intersect once more. The transition from collegiate superstardom to the brutal professional grind is notoriously unforgiving, a ruthless reality check where past accomplishments, viral highlights, and even national championship rings carry absolutely zero weight the moment you step onto a professional floor. Music and lingering collegiate grudges are strictly expected to be left completely at the door. Music, yet the complex ecosystem of elite women's basketball remains incredibly interconnected. Music, featuring highly exclusive USA minicamps, private off-season open gyms, and intense crossover scrimmages where elite college prospects regularly collide with freshly drafted rookies, music, and battle-tested veterans. It was inside one of these highly exclusive, completely untelevised environments, often described by insiders as the ultimate proving grounds, that the paths of these bitter rivals, reportedly music, collided once again, setting the stage for a dramatic confrontation that absolutely nobody inside that building was remotely prepared to witness. Reports immediately began leaking from well-connected insiders and anonymous staff members that during a fiercely contested, intensely physical Day 1 scrimmage session, the underlying hostility was incredibly palpable from the very first whistle, radiating throughout the entire gym and making every single player on that floor uncomfortably conscious of the dark, unresolved history between the two. This wasn't simply about competing for a roster spot or getting quality repetitions in against elite-level competition. This was a deeply personal, fiercely territorial war where aggressive body language communicated volumes louder than any verbal trash talk ever possibly could. Every screen was planted a little harder. Every closeout was dangerously reckless. And the unspoken tension hovered in the air like thick, suffocating smoke, threatening to combust into a full-blown physical altercation at any given second. And what leaked next from that secretive camp completely changed everything the public thought it understood about the deeply personal nature of this explosive situation. Enter the alleged wild card at the center of this detonating scenario. Music, a fiery, notoriously unapologetic veteran presence known simply as Sophie, who reportedly inserted herself into the chaotic confrontation, not merely as a standard teammate, but as a deliberate enforcer drawing a hard, undeniable line directly in the sand. In professional and elite-level sports, highly recruited rookies frequently depend on established veterans to safely navigate the treacherous, politically charged waters of locker room dynamics. But when a veteran actively and aggressively participates in the deliberate icing out of a specific opponent, it transforms a personal grudge into a full-scale, undeniable clique war. Insiders whispered frantically that the fierce duo made it aggressively and unmistakably clear they wanted absolutely nothing to do with the South Carolina standout. Deliberately and visibly isolating her throughout partner drills while exchanging icy, contemptuous glares that radiated pure, unfiltered disdain toward anyone unfortunate enough to be watching. This specific brand of psychological warfare is actually incredibly widespread across the elite professional ranks, where mental fortitude is stress-tested just as relentlessly as raw physical ability. Music, but to witness it play out so openly, so brazenly against one specific rival sent massive shockwaves rippling through the entire coaching staff and every single player in attendance. It was a crystal clear, completely unmistakable, deafeningly loud message that the disrespect of the recent past had absolutely not been forgotten. That apologies were neither desired nor remotely on the table. And that the social hierarchy of this brand new environment was going to be forcefully established through sheer, unapologetic psychological domination. The gym rapidly fractured into silent, anxious factions with players nervously monitoring the deeply toxic dynamic, acutely aware that any attempt to step in and mediate could instantly place them directly in the crosshairs of the powerful alliance that had just aggressively materialized. But the absolute breaking point of the entire camp, the singular moment that would immediately become legendary in the darkest folklore of women's basketball history, was still waiting just around the corner. When the final whistle of the grueling, exhausting session eventually blew and the time-honored, customary line formed at center court to exchange mutual respect through standard handshakes, the suffocating tension inside that facility allegedly surged to an almost unbearable peak that left every bystander completely speechless and frozen in breathless anticipation. The handshake line represents the ultimate sacred tradition across all of competitive sports. That brief, critical moment where warriors who just spent an entire session trying to physically destroy each other pause to acknowledge their shared humanity, making a deliberate refusal to participate in absolute, unambiguous declaration of total, unforgivable war. As the exhausted, sweat-soaked players slowly progressed through the line, slapping hands and exchanging standard words of acknowledgement, the leaked account claims that Caitlin and her veteran enforcer Sophie intentionally and dramatically broke formation, coldly redirecting their eyes and openly refusing to extend a hand when they finally arrived at their fierce, unforgiving rival. The massive, echoing gym allegedly plunged into a dead, terrifying silence. The precise kind of heavy, suffocatingly uncomfortable quiet where you could literally hear a single pin drop against the hardwood as the ultimate unspoken law of athletic sportsmanship was violently and unapologetically shattered in plain view of everyone present. It was a vicious, surgically calculated, devastatingly public snub that perfectly echoed the identical dismissive, arrogant energy of the now infamous wave-off, proving beyond any possible shadow of a doubt that no amount of elapsed time, hard-earned maturity, or championship hardware had extinguished the boiling, seething anger constantly churning just beneath the surface. For the player left completely hanging in front of her stunned peers, it served as a stark, brutal reminder that certain bridges are permanently reduced to cold, irretrievable ashes. While for the two players deliberately walking away, it stood as a ruthless, completely unyielding declaration of absolute dominance that they refused to apologize or account for under any circumstances. Music, and the immediate violently explosive fallout from this single fleeting act of calculated disrespect music, would instantly ignite a massive, uncontrollable firestorm that nobody involved could contain. Within mere hours, the frantic music whispers of this brutal premeditated rejection burst through the locked doors of the private training facility, music, and detonated across the internet like an absolute, unstoppable freight train, sending basketball Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit spiraling into total, irreversible music chaos. Passionate, deeply invested fans who had spent the previous 2 years fiercely and relentlessly debating the ethics of the original wave-off were suddenly armed with enormous quantities of fresh ammunition, immediately launching into highly charged music, intensely personal debates about sportsmanship, unchecked egos, and the dark, carefully concealed underbelly of hyper-competitive professional athletes. Major daytime sports podcasts, highly compensated digital commentators, and viral content creators immediately seized the unverified leak, obsessively dissecting the alleged snub from every conceivable angle, desperately questioning whether this particular level of petty, high school caliber drama was actively corroding the overall reputation of the sport's biggest, most commercially valuable rising star. Massive online factions instantly descended into absolute, all-out war with one another. One fiercely devoted side passionately defended music, the icy maneuver as an old-school, cutthroat, strictly business competitive mentality, loudly insisting that professional athletes should never be forcibly expected to manufacture fake respect or smile warmly for someone they genuinely, deeply, and personally despise. On the completely opposite music side of the digital battlefield, furious critics aggressively condemned the coordinated snub as an arrogant, entirely classless exhibition of unresolved bitterness, accusing the duo of conducting themselves like vindictive high school bullies rather than professional ambassadors of a rapidly expanding global game. The narrative spiraled completely out of control so breathtakingly fast that it quickly became virtually impossible to separate the raw, unedited reality of that quiet gym from the wildly sensationalized, heavily distorted rumors churned out relentlessly by the internet machine. But the undeniable devastation to their public relationship was already permanently, irrevocably sealed. Yet the real underlying truth buried beneath this overwhelming wave of daily drama is something far more profound and critically important for the long-term future of the entire sport. What this widely circulated Day 1 disaster genuinely exposes to the casual observer is the gritty, completely unfiltered, frequently ugly reality of elite women's basketball, a deeply layered sport that has historically been aggressively sanitized by mainstream media networks, music, but is actually powered by intense, borderline ruthless psychological warfare at the absolute highest levels. For decades, music, The media relentlessly attempted to package women's basketball players as perfectly composed, perpetually smiling, flawless ambassadors who were simply grateful for the opportunity to grow the game, completely disregarding the fact that they are genuinely fierce, music, intensely aggressive, utterly unapologetic warriors who carry their deeply personal grudges like hard-earned badges of honor. These athletes absolutely do not like each other, and they consistently weaponize past slights, viral humiliations, and charged media narratives as literal, highly combustible fuel to endure the brutal, merciless daily demands of music elite professional competition. But the coldly calculated refusal to shake a rival's hand isn't merely a fleeting, emotionally impulsive moment of sudden disrespect. It is a highly strategic, surgically deliberate chess move specifically engineered to assert complete, music dominance, aggressively protect deeply personal psychological boundaries, and preserve a critical mental advantage inside a cutthroat league where any detectable sign of weakness is immediately and ruthlessly exploited, music, by the opposition. The modern era of women's basketball is officially stepping into its very own version of the 1980s NBA, powerfully mirroring the blood-boiling, intensely personal rivalries of the Bad Boys Pistons or the deeply embedded hatred between legendary franchises where players routinely refused to acknowledge each other in public and regularly erupted on the court. Music. Because whether this bombshell training camp rumor was mildly exaggerated by overeager insiders hunting desperately for a scoop, or whether it was entirely, 100% factual down to the very last icy glare and deliberately withheld hand, it permanently establishes beyond all reasonable doubt that the bad blood forged on the college hardwood is devastatingly music, alive, dangerously contagious, and rapidly evolving into a massive, undeniable professional rivalry for the ages. And as these extraordinarily gifted, relentlessly scrutinized music athletes continue to absolutely command the daily sports headlines while elevating this beautiful game to entirely unprecedented financial and cultural heights, it leaves every single one of us endlessly, restlessly wondering, will this deeply bitter, intensely personal feud ultimately force a violent, completely unavoidable reckoning on the professional court? Music. Or is this vicious, yet wildly captivating cycle of unrelenting disrespect precisely what this game so desperately needs to not just survive, but completely dominate the modern media landscape?